I'm so glad to have Kristin and Thomas to talk a little bit more about brand and the role that it plays. Many of you may have come to the ACS meeting and our expo floor. As I was walking, I heard at least one of the scientists say, like, Microsoft, what are they doing here? That's my first question for you, Thomas. Microsoft's making a big splash in our market, and we love to see it. But how does an established brand like Microsoft like break in a science marketing community? Can you talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing in this very niche professional market?
Sure thing. Well, one thing, it's pretty difficult to break into a new market, going after a new audience. We talked a little bit about brand awareness survey, so I'm going to conduct a little survey here. How many people, by show of hands, have heard of Microsoft? Small mom and pop shop, okay. How many people have heard of Azure Quantum Elements? Okay, pretty decent. Maybe we're making some progress there. Well, that is one of the first questions we get a lot when we show up at events or we're doing webinars. We're trying to talk to scientists, material scientists, chemists, is what is Microsoft doing here? So I'm going to do a quick little context setting here, where Microsoft, big company, we're developing a quantum computer, and the best application of this new kind of computer is going to be chemistry and material science. And so we know that this is a market that we need to go after, but it's not a market that we have been in. It's not an audience that we've talked to. We talk to IT decision makers, business decision makers, developers. And so we are really focused on, hey, how do we pave the way for this new type of computing that's going to have a really big impact down the line? And so we've developed a platform called Azure Quantum Elements, which uses technology today that can help accelerate scientific discovery. And it really maps to our mission statement at Microsoft, empowering every person and organization across the planet to achieve more. We've focused on, hey, how can we drive value today, and then also educate and skill chemists, specifically computational chemists, to be able to use quantum computers once they're ready, once we can integrate them into this technology. And so it's been a journey. We announced this as a private preview product last June. And we've been really trying to focus on, hey, how can we build our brand? How can we establish trust? Lots of the things that we heard about this morning. So we've had a lot of initiatives like that to really get our name out there, really tell the story around, hey, what is this technology? What role can it play? Going through, hey, how do people know Microsoft? Maybe understanding and addressing some misconceptions about how people understand Microsoft, because we're a big consumer and commercial company. We haven't been involved on the science side. And then one thing that we found is really helpful for our approach is partnering with a lot of third-party associations, influencers, et cetera. A lot of the channels that Microsoft has at our disposal, again, goes to some of our historical audiences. And so that's something where we want to meet the audience. Chemistry, Kim talked about earlier, meet the audience where they are. And so we want to partner with C&EN, we want to partner with Chemistry World, the American Institute of Chemical Engineers, where people are going to for chemistry information, the latest, greatest. Hey, what are the innovations happening in this field? Where can I learn about that? And so we want to partner with them, help us get credibility in the field while we're telling our story, building our brand, and then, really trying to work with this community, understand this community, and start building this category.
So, chemists and scientists are naturally curious, but also a little bit skeptical. So you talked a little bit about the private preview product, if I have that right, that alliteration. Have you found that hard to break into? Do you see that skepticism, especially in like lead gen forms and all the things that we certainly do? Have you found that in your marketing approach?
Yeah, so private preview products are kind of one of the earliest stages of products. I think people probably have seen across tech, sometimes private preview products don't make it to general availability. It goes private preview, public preview, and then GA. And so that is really, really a challenge that we are continuing to address with this audience. They want to know that, hey, we're here, we're investing. And there's some ways that we're going about addressing that. One is getting our CEO involved, Satya Nadella. He's made several announcements. He's partnered with us on several of our initiatives. He has a big quote. It's an ambitious quote, but he wants to condense 250 years of chemistry into the next 25 using technology. Yeah, it's ambitious. We think it's definitely possible with upcoming technology, with AI, high performance computing, and eventually quantum computing. But it is ambitious. But that's something that we've worked with to address. Of like, hey, our leadership is bought in, our organization is bought in. We're in private preview. We're testing. We're getting feedback. But we are here to stay. We think that this is a huge opportunity to really drive science and drive progress and address some of society's biggest challenges coming up.
Wonderful. So maybe I'll pivot a little bit to Kristin. With Linus Group, I know that you partner a lot with lots of clients and partners in the life science space. One study that I always look forward to that you've been doing for years is serving science marketers and trends. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, what you're seeing in some of that research and why you actually do it.
Sure. So we really want to understand what is on the minds, what are people thinking, how are they using budgets, what are some of the priorities that our audience has. And so we do a couple of studies a year. The first one is the state of science, where we do that 2 times a year, where we're looking at what's on the mind of scientists. This year, we partnered with Select Science, and you'll see some preview data here today to understand what's on the minds of 160 science marketers. We wanted to understand, okay, what is happening in your world today? What are you concerned about? What are you thinking about? What are you planning for? What is your C-suite asking you to do, or what, as the C-suite, are trying to plan from a marketing perspective? So the slide that you see here is we wanted to understand, how effective you believe the following marketing tactics are in your organization. But the top most important one here is the in-person customer events. Second, content creation, and then third, webinars and online events. So what do we mean by those in-person events? So these are smaller, more intimate. They can be larger, but what's happening here is that your audience is talking to you in a really intimate environment. We're, as Kim mentioned earlier, we're being authentic. We're connecting with our customers. We're connecting with and really trying to understand what people want and how they want it. Okay? If there are any surprises here, I'm happy to answer in the question and answer section. We also wanted to know, and maybe some of this will seem really familiar with you. Maybe some of you in this room actually took the survey. So if so, thank you. What are your biggest challenges? What are you thinking about in terms of how you're performing? Probably no surprise, lead to sale conversion is number 1. Budget limitations. Yes, everyone talks about budget, and you'll see kind of a positive side on this next one right here. But those are the biggest challenges that some of your peers have, are science marketers. One of the things that we also wanted to know was, which marketing tactics do you believe will change in importance in 2025? And so this is looking out what's happening next year. So as you're going through your planning cycles, I know many of you are either in it now or you're just about to start. Content creation will increase. Webinars and online events you see as increasing. Social media, I know we've spent a lot of time today talking about social media, also increase. There's going to be no change to online advertising or sales support, PR, or trade shows, and then decrease a bit in traditional print. So for those of you that are thinking about planning, knowing this benchmark of what your peers are doing may or may not be helpful. So where are your budgets going? I know when Stephanie, we were talking about this in our preview call, we said, okay, how are people planning budgets? What's happening? Where are they spending money? The majority of your budgets, and for the people that answered this survey, are still going to trade shows. You have to be there, you need to be there. But what we found in our State of Science survey, that's the bigger study that we do every year, is that these authentic connections, this is what's driving those sales engagement. That's what's driving the customer relationships. And that's where our scientists want to be. So by planning, by having these intimate events and doing your trade shows, doing your events, that's really what's dominating budgets. I have 2 more slides here. So budgets. Everybody wants to know, what do other people have in their budgets? Is my budget the smallest? Or, if my CEO says that we need to divert some money from our marketing budget, where is it going? Well, what we can see here, and you may even want to share this slide with your leadership team if you're not on the leadership team. 2 and 3 expect little to no change, and nearly 30% expect moderate or significant increases. So take that as a proof point to say, you know what, we need more money this year. We need to spend. And then finally, what are the things that will really influence marketing in 2025? And no surprise, we've talked about it a lot today, AI, as well as customer expectations around communication. So that personalization, but then there's also going to be a lot of increased competition. So thinking about what do our customers want? What are people talking about? How do we plan budgets? Hopefully this is helpful. And there's going to be, on September 10th, a full release of all this data. You can check it out.
Wonderful. Thank you. It aligns. And we're planning a rebrand for ACS in 2026. So I'm getting ready to ask for a whole lot of money. So I'm going to take that slide back to the CEO, see what he says. But, I think this came up in Dylan's session, a little bit, that struggle. I see that lead to conversion being top of mind for science marketers. They have to prove what they're doing, prove the efficacy of their efforts, certainly. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about your perspective. Maybe Thomas, if you'll go first. Really just thinking about how do you balance that performance-based marketing versus brand marketing as well as, and your perspective on it.
Yeah, sure thing. It's really a tricky challenge to balance that. And I think Dylan in the previous panel, they shared the slide around, hey, how does brand help performance? And we saw a lot of positives where brand can help facilitate that performance. It can facilitate leads. It can facilitate sales. So definitely not something that we want to lose sight of. Definitely something that we need to keep investing in. But in today's environment, there is a lot of pressure to deliver leads, to drive revenue, and continue kind of building the business. And I think at Microsoft with this private preview product, we're trying to establish this category. We're trying to prove out this business because we're in the incubation group at Microsoft called Strategic Missions and Technologies. So it's really vital for us to make sure that we find that balance where, hey, we need to build the brand. We need to find activities that can build brand, but we need to have the right lead gen initiatives and activations to deliver high quality leads to sales so that we can say, hey, we're seeing this audience. We're seeing them resonate with this technology. We're seeing an uptick in usage and adoption as we think about building this business for Microsoft.
Yeah. How do you, Kristin, think about getting your clients and some of your client partners to advocate for the budget that's going to allow them to balance those two things?
Yeah, it's a question that everyone has. And from our perspective, building a brand is one of the most important, if not the most important thing you can do as a marketer. That brand is your future proof. It's your vision. It's the emotional connection you have to your audience. By spending time thinking about what your brand stands for, what it means, what people will fight for, that's what develops that resilient future for you and your team and your company.
Yeah, brand is trust. I think I heard you say that and so Nick talked a little bit about trust. Certainly the trust of readers, many of them who we're targeting, the trust of the public with science. So what are suggestions that you might have that you can infuse brand into product level marketing and strategy as well? Do you have any opinions on that, Kristin?
Yeah, so by showing that authentic self, and I think you've talked a lot about how Microsoft is trying to create the audience, you're trying to be in the places, you are acting with authenticity and honesty and showing that you actually care about the environments that you're delivering products to. That's the number one way to develop trust. We heard from a lot of our scientists in our State of Science study that trust is the number one factor that's eroding confidence in marketing and communication and also just any interactions that you're having with a company. It's a global problem. Trust and developing those relationships is really how you're doing it. And no one wants to hear it's about the one-on-one connections, but it is. It's a lot of one-on-one connection.
Yeah, just sorry to quickly add on. I think the building trust is super important. It can take years to build trust. It can take minutes to lose it. Totally agree that, hey, showing up at events, having these personal connections is the way to go. And I think we've also taken some approaches at Microsoft as we think about marketing Azure quantum elements to these scientists, in that, hey, we need to make sure that we're thinking about responsible quantum computing, responsible AI. So we've invested a lot of time and resources working with different partners to make sure that we're one of the leaders as we think about those responsible initiatives. And then it can be even as small as, because for Microsoft, we haven't been working with this audience for very long, but it's something that we've pushed our teams of, like, hey, if we're making a big announcement, we better have the data to show scientists, because they are skeptical, they're curious, they want to see it. So any announcement, we need at least preprint technical paper where people can dive in. Best case, we can have peer-reviewed research, but we need to make sure that it's not just a typical Microsoft announcement that we would do for other parts of our business, where, hey, we can just put up a press release and people take it for its word. But hey, let's make sure that we tie it to the technical documentation, because people will be curious, and that's really part of building trust with this audience.
Yeah. So I picked up on something you said, responsible AI. I was like, stuck in my head for a moment. I've been, getting lots of sales calls myself on, bringing in AI tools for the ACS marketing team. Our team looked at it a little bit, and what really came down to, there's such a disparity of where folks are. The technology is changing. Paul talked a lot about that. Thank you, Paul. It was a great presentation this morning. And we're really working on like upskilling the staff on prompts, really making sure that we can start there before we actually invest in a solution. So I just wondered, how are you, Thomas, maybe thinking about AI? Are you leveraging it in any of your marketing strategies? With Microsoft, and it was Copilot. So just wondered if there were any any secrets that you could share at all.
Well, first, I appreciate the Copilot plug.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we leverage AI for productivity a lot. So as Paul was talking about earlier, that's definitely one where we're leveraging Copilot or other tools that are available. Something else that we haven't used it necessarily for content creation, but we have created a Copilot in Azure Quantum, which is a Copilot that's actually built or trained on quantum computing. It's trained on chemistry and material science. And so people can use this interface, ask all kinds of chemistry and quantum questions, and it is trained on open access resources, and it will make sure to cite all the answers that it comes up with. But that's just a way that we're using it on the marketing side, is to get people really comfortable with leveraging Copilot. Obviously, we need to make sure that we continue building trust, and they need to trust the answers, and that's why the citations are very important. But we want to give chemists, material scientists, et cetera, tools to be able to answer questions. And we think that the future of this kind of platform is going to be really through a Copilot-like interface, where you might not need to be a computational chemist that has to learn how to code through all these workflows. It can be an experimental chemist or other disciplines of chemistry. We really want to democratize these types of tools. And the way to do that is through Copilot, where you can ask questions, you can have the right prompts. It can help you do a lot of the heavy lifting of the coding, or it can help upskill you when it comes to the coding. So that's a really big initiative for us, is Copilot in Azure Quantum. But it needs to be very specialized, needs to be built on the right training data to be useful and to work.
Yeah. What about you, Kristin? Is your team experimenting with AI tools to accelerate, productivity internally at all?
Yeah, we are. We're in a big experimentation phase and trying out a lot of different tools. One of the tools that we're starting to experiment with clients that are willing and open to trying different ways of interview techniques. We're partnering with a company to have an AI chatbot actually conduct interviews. And it's providing some really fascinating data, from being able to have live conversations with an AI-generated text prompt that we actually develop a lot of time in developing what are the right questions. And then we're following up and having that human conversation, that one-on-one live conversation, to really understand, okay, how might we use this data? How might we understand what might move forward? And we're having some great success. And we're really encouraged by the results. Of course, it's new, so we're trying a lot of different things. But we're seeing our clients try a lot too with AI.
Wonderful. So I'm looking around the room, and I certainly can appreciate that a lot of us are at different stages of our career, or different places within our organizations, may have big budgets, small budgets. So I just wondered if you had any advice for those, and there's all different social media platforms, etc. Where a small budget marketer, any recommendations you might have for them in terms of where they should make investment.
LinkedIn. So we're seeing a lot of our clients have a lot of, I mean, it's no surprise, right? And Kim, you even mentioned you have a different voice for LinkedIn, right, than TikTok. So LinkedIn is a place where our clients are having a lot of success, no surprise. But then also in-person events, big or small, having those thought leader conversations, having your KOLs, if you have a user group, really connecting with your audience, showing that you care, being there, doing the so what's, kind of what you're doing.
Any advice, Thomas, that you have?
Yeah, believe it or not, Microsoft is a big company, but not all teams have giant budgets. As I said, this is a private preview product, and so we do have to be pretty scrappy with our different activations. We love LinkedIn; it's part of Microsoft, so that's great. I think it's a great way to connect with the right people in the right way. In-person events, we found a lot of success with digital events where we can scale beyond single place locations, still have a pretty good connection, even though it's not in person, but we can at least have a two-way dialogue with Q&A at the end of webinars and things like that. And those are the activations where we find that are kind of, they deliver the ROI, and they don't require a ton of budget to make happen. You just have to be strategic and a little scrappy.
Yeah. So I saw, Thomas, that you relied on certainly events, of course, but a lot of storytelling in some of your marketing strategies. And so I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about, has that been successful for you, especially being an established brand, breaking into the market, how storytelling has helped be part of your marketing strategies?
Yeah, we think storytelling is super crucial into selling a new product, bringing a new product to market. Where you can announce all these features and capabilities, but they don't really mean anything unless it's told within a story. So we actually had a decent sized story, got some earned media coverage back in February, where we announced a partnership with the Pacific Northwest National Lab, where we leveraged a lot of these computational resources, where we were able to take 32.6 million candidates of materials. We were able to use high performance computing and AI models to winnow that down to a handful of candidates, looking at different criteria in a matter of weeks, which was very, very fast. And we handed off, and this is, I think, really important to the story that we're trying to tell. There is still the human component. So we were able to use computational resources to find some potential candidates, but then we brought in the experts at Pacific Northwest National Lab to actually look through, oh, have you thought about this? Oh, this might not be the right fit. But they actually found a really promising lead, and they synthesized that into a battery electrolyte that uses 70% less lithium. That always trips me up, less lithium than other candidates. And we have found a lot of success with that story because it's a real tangible thing that people care about. People understand that lithium, see that word, is a scarce resource. And so people are invested in trying to find solutions to those problems. And so that was a really great story that we've leveraged a lot in our activations and our storytelling, trying to use that to really build this brand, is to showcase, yes, these types of resources can help solve problems. Yes, there's still human elements that are absolutely needed to make this work. But we will really want to showcase the potential, and having those tangible examples is super important. And to be able to tell that in a compelling story is really important.
Yeah. So, Kristin, I just wonder, I'm sure you've been doing this study for years. Have you seen storytelling increase from marketers in their marketing mix in general and what you're doing for your clients and recommendations that you make?
Yeah, it's interesting, Stephanie. We should ask specifically about storytelling. I'm not sure if that question is there, but that's a really good one. But what we do talk about is those insight, the connections, and then advising others on the stories that they tell. I think you all received Hamid Ghanadon's book, Catalytic Experiences. That's all about storytelling and how to communicate to technical professionals, and really understanding what that why is, understanding what your insight is, and the reason for being. That is all part of that critical experience for the story.
Wonderful. So I could sit here all day and just ask questions. And so I wondered, anyone here have questions for? Oh, there's one online. Sorry, breaking my neck here. Let's see. All right. So regarding custom events, are those more one-to-ones or something more like user group meetings or something more social? First part of the question, and then, or all of the above. What are some examples of successful customer events that you've seen facilitated? And it looks like folks from the audience might be able to answer that question as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. All of the above.
Yeah.
But I'll share a story about Van Rex, who was acquired by Cytiva a few years ago. Van Rex, and they still do this, now Cytiva, has their user group meeting every year in Whistler. And it is the place where everyone comes to talk about aseptic filling. It creates that connection. They were able to communicate their brand and show how their brand exists in British Columbia. So anything from a user group meeting to a one-off dinner outside of an actual conference wall, or even a one-on-one connection in a sales visit. It's just getting to understand, again, I know I'm saying the same thing over and over, who are your customers, what motivates them, and what drives them.
Wonderful. Thomas, any thoughts for you?
No, I fully agree. I think all of the above. I think one example is our presence at ACS Fall, where we tried to set up our booth, and hopefully people were able to check out our booth over the course of the event, right, at the expo entrance. But we tried to set up in a way where we could facilitate lots of different types of connections, whether it's somebody just coming up to get a little USB splitter that we were giving away. We did mini 15, 30-minute sessions talking about different topics in computational chemistry in our mini theater. We were doing demos. We had customer meetings at our table for more of those one-on-one connections. And then we could take folks off-site to do more technical briefings and things like that. And so really all of the above kind of meet the audience where they are, but then also meet them where they are of where they're at with their learning, and just be able to go with, hey, are you just learning more? Or, hey, are you ready for a technical discussion? And having that flexibility is really helpful at these types of events.
Do you think having such a powerful and strong brand like Microsoft has been an advantage when introducing something that's relatively new and disruptive, or is it a disadvantage?
That's a great question. I think for the most part, it is an advantage. Microsoft can get you in the door in a lot of conversations. Microsoft has a pretty high trust rating, obviously high brand awareness. I do think there is some historical baggage of where Microsoft has played, what we're known for, that we need to, as we go to different audiences like this very technical scientific audience, it does take some time and energy to overcome the amount of times of people coming up to our booth at ACS asking, hey, are you selling surfaces? There were definitely a few of those, but I think for the most part, it's definitely an advantage having that awareness, that trust, that familiarity, but there's still a lot of work where we have to demystify some misunderstandings around what we're doing in a specific setting, and then to really build our credibility with this audience, because just because you're a really well-known brand doesn't mean that scientists trust you or specific audiences trust you. So we have to kind of really spend a lot of time to build that trust.
You mentioned the importance of LinkedIn kind of in today's landscape. What is the importance of, so a lot of our CEOs really care about like number of followers, followership on LinkedIn and sometimes like Instagram. And stuff. So what do you think the importance of that is today? And kind of, I've loved any thoughts about kind of thought leadership on LinkedIn today.
I'll jump in because we're certainly looking at ACS's social media channels right now, and we have huge followers on across the various platforms. If it comes down to like where do we invest our time, but we really like to step back and look at what engagement we were getting. We were finding that we were putting really across our organization, whoever put this tweet up or put this post up, we were really putting everything up there. And so, I always say to my team, they get sick of me saying it. So, what do we want to be known for? And so what are the 4 or 5 things that we want to be known for? And really having a content strategy when it comes to social media in the same way. I think it's interesting though, I think from B2B, it's obvious to think about LinkedIn, and LinkedIn I've certainly personally seen, the growth, especially as X or Twitter these days is so different. We'll just leave it there, right? It's so different. But it's really comes down to, as Kim was talking about earlier today, like meeting your audience where they are. From an engagement perspective for us, Facebook still drives traffic to our content bigger than any other. We see an engaged audience on Instagram, of course, but it's not to send traffic back, at all. It's really to keep them within the platform. And so we have to have a different content strategy, certainly, as well. And so, for me, I look at those engagement metrics and like, what are we trying to do platform by platform? And then having a content strategy that aligns across those different channels as well. Thomas or Kristin, what would you add?
Yeah, just to add on to that, specifically as you think about employee advocacy, it's really understanding what their audience is. And so we have a whole content strategy around, hey, is our leadership team sharing something, and we need to make sure that we have the right CTAs, the right content and copy around that. And that's very different than what we're trying to get a lot of our scientists, engineers, more of the product team sharing, because they have very different audiences. Those audiences have very different expectations for content. And so, hey, if we're doing a technical webinar, maybe we don't have our CVP who mostly talks to business decision makers talking about that webinar. It would be great to have some extra numbers, but that's not really the type of audience that we're trying to drive to that specific event. So matching the content with the audience of each of those channels, whether that's employees or whether that's certain corporate channels, is definitely really important to consider.
Yeah, I agree with you both. But then also just adding value whenever you say something. If it's, and it seems so obvious, but how many times do you see something on LinkedIn that you're like, thanks, this just crowded up my algorithm, right? But what is the value you're providing to your audience, whether it be employee brand or company brands, or really talking about, again, that big why?
Yeah, and to your question on thought leadership, it's always good to have the executive leadership team or your CEO, but I think it's bigger than that. I think as Thomas picked up, even here as we're here, I was seeing some of my colleagues that have been posting about the ACS meeting, right, and their experiences. It's authentic. We have some of our team member, a young lady named Victoria, who does all the marketing for ACS fall meeting. She just came back from maternity leave, had to hit the ground running, and her son is here. And so her LinkedIn post today was showing, a future chemist onesie on her son. And that's such a core memory that choked me up this morning when I saw it. And so to me, that's just as important of that employee advocacy as it is for our CEO to post something as well. Other questions?
This has been an awesome session. Thanks so much for sharing. My question's probably mostly for you, Kristin, and it's about the budget aspects. And I think one of the questions we get asked a lot, which I really struggle to answer, so I'm now going to defer it to you so you could tell me what to say in the future, is just about what is a realistic budget for a life science company for marketing. And if you look at like other B2B industries, it's not a great and precise measure, but you're looking at like 6% of revenue or 8% of revenue. And typically I speak to life science companies and they're at 1% of revenue. So I'd just love to know, what's your experience? Should be budgeting more? What are your thoughts on that?
It really depends, right? There's no one answer. Your experience of 1 to 3% of revenue, that's a good estimate, but I don't have the numbers. Stephanie, Thomas, I'm not sure. Do you have any numbers that you could share? I don't have a hard and fast rule.
Yeah, for us, it depends. I think it depends on priority for the year. I'd say in terms of, ACS is a nonprofit, but we certainly have some for-profit parts of our business. And I'd say it sits within probably that 1 to 3%, but that fluctuates. When we have new products that are being developed, I'm getting ready to ask for a lot of money for this rebrand. So y'all wish me luck on that one. But so I think it depends on the priorities, and that fluctuates.
I'm going to give a non-answer here. It really depends. And at Microsoft, we have all different types of products and priorities. And so it really depends on the business and business priorities. So don't have a hard and fast number for you as well.
And I imagine that specifically your position, Thomas, of like asking for that budget is in some ways difficult because you guys don't have basically any revenue or very much in your particular department yet, right? So my question is about like your approach to demand generation. This idea of like, how do you think about this? Beyond just understanding the chemists and meeting where they are. What's your approach to like you're introducing a technology that's even new to a lot of scientists and doing that in a way that still maintains attention and not just throwing dissertations at them?
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky thing because we're trying to build this new category. It's there's a paradigm shift that's happening in chemistry where we're going away from wet lab experiments are still important, but we're getting more utility out of these computational driven discoveries. And so at Microsoft, we have to kind of prove out the business as we build the brand. And so it's definitely a challenge, but it's still super important that we are able to, in order to get more investment, we're able to prove this out. Microsoft is not a company that just throws money at something where they don't see the end result. And so we need to find ways to drive those, to drive that demand, drive those leads, convert those leads into sales, to really prove out this business and show that this could be a real opportunity going forward.
I feel like we see that companies, just thinking about the data that you shared, Kristin, I feel like we see companies are scared to move their budgets to invest in things that are not just like traditional advertising. Any like recommendations when we like face those challenges of like communicating like it's worth your money? And even Thomas, you talk about like you guys had a scrappy budget, but it was worth the investment in the end. So like what do you say to leadership the next time you have conversation around budget? Like this is why we should invest that money, even if we might necessarily not have it. I don't have the proof that it's going to be worth it.
I think sharing data is really important. So look for data like the data that we just shared, the state of science marketing, our state of science. There's other studies that will show the investment in marketing is well worth the output, right? And being able to talk about what your customers want, what they want. Do they want to be engaging in person? I think the answer is yes. So just having data, having your good story to tell to leadership will be helpful.
Yeah, I think my experience at Microsoft, specifically on this team, is as we announced this product last June, we wanted to find ways to engage this audience. And so something that I did was this kind of this social audit to look at, hey, with this technical audience, who are they following on social? Who are they looking to for news, information, etc.? And that's honestly how I found C&EN and ACS. That's how I found Chemistry World and some other partners that we work with. And then was able to get some experimental budget. We were able to do some webinars. And then once we saw the leads and engagement from that webinar, we were then able to kind of prove out that, hey, we're seeing the right people, the right roles, the right companies showing up. We're seeing great engagement, people attending, people watching for the entirety of the webinar, people asking great questions, asking for follow-up. And so having some data at the beginning to say, hey, this is our hypothesis. We think it's going to work. The data is pointing that, hey, we should do this type of activation. And then once you have done that experiment, really proving out, hey, the ROI is there, really just helps get more and more investment to really build that momentum.
Yeah, and I'd say that I completely agree. I think data is super important, but wrapping a story around that, right? I think people remember the story. And so sometimes we even do that internally at ACS when we're with our colleagues and to prove this is what we do. And let's partner together on it and showing them some data, but wrapping up what was the problem, what we were trying to solve for, and what were the results. And doing that transparently and authentically certainly helps to build that coalition and collaboration.
So, based on your experience with working with marketing departments, are you seeing any trends with respect to sales enablement initiatives and a way of kind of expanding out that marketing budget to address the sales needs? I'm just curious, what are you seeing in the field for that?
I can't answer that question. You did tell me you were going to ask me the toughest question. That's not one I can answer, but maybe Stephanie or
Yeah,
Thomas can answer.
I manage both sales and marketing. I think, and often sometimes those can be two sides of a different coin, but we're all working towards the same, objective. From a collaboration perspective is really going to the sales reps often and saying, what are your objections that you're hearing? What are the pain points that you're hearing, from customers? Then do you build content, that speaks to that may help them within the life cycle, right? Do you build a case study, as I just mentioned, certainly for them? Do you build, content that meets those objections early on that they can point to? And so, I think that there are ways that sales and marketing have to collaborate and partner together, because at the end of the day, we all want the same things. We want to celebrate. And so bring them together and saying, what does success look like? We have different approaches to getting there, but we all want the same goals certainly as well. So I've seen tools for sales enablement, right? Where, for our team, I have some of our sales reps here as well. They're always wondering, like, we need a new piece of content to put out. And so our team, wants to do that. But then at the end of the year, we look back and say, did that help to move the needle? Did that help to drive ROI in general? And then if it didn't, then maybe we don't do it, the next year as well. And so that partnership is key, I think, as well. Anything you'd add, Thomas?
I agree.
Yeah.
I think that connection between sales and marketing is super important. That feedback loop of like, hey, we're providing these leads. How did the conversations turn out? What's the feedback? Are we going after the right companies, the right roles? Where can we improve? And then also just making sure there's consistency across content from sales enablement to the marketing side of like, hey, we need to make sure that we're telling kind of the same consistent story and being in lockstep. Otherwise, we're going to cause confusion. And if we cause confusion, we're going to lose trust, going back to trust. And so we need to make sure that we're working hand in hand, even though that can sometimes take a lot of time, sometimes take a lot of energy. It's really important to get that connection right.
Yeah. One thing when I was here at our fall meeting, I talked to an exhibitor, and they were really just talking about some of the content strategies that they use. And they actually, focus with their help desk. Like what are the questions that they're getting over and over at the help desk? Sometimes you don't think to mine, those types of places for themes that you can build into a content strategy. I said, oh, I'm taking that one back with me, as well, or their customer success teams as well. What are you hearing over and over? And can we create a piece of content that helps, within the sales process, but also after customers come on board as well? And so that was something I got as a tidbit this week, and I plan to reach out to our member and subscriber services certainly to see what they're learning and hearing.
So I'm not in marketing, but I think to take off of what she said and just listening and trying to be sort of on the background, and I'm sure there's probably this element, but that element of fun, that element of like thinking outside of the box, even if the data doesn't back it up, because we're in such an evolving world that there's not data, or the data is so fluctuating, especially with social media or just events. I mean, how crazy it is that you see like, again, not to get into anything political, but how many people showed up on Zoom meetouts recently, right? For the huge fundraising, which is so crazy to see, like, wow, I didn't even think about that. Like, who thought of that? So I guess I'm sure there's that aspect in marketing, but I kind of get the feeling like you're presenting things that are very safe, which is good. But, what is not safe that is also good? What is outside of the box that's also good, that's allowed in marketing?
Yeah, you're not a marketer, but you sound like one, Kim. I don't know. I think it's about for me, it's about being authentic, certainly. And so, my team, this event, really came out of, someone had an idea to do it. And I said, what? We have a long week, at our show, and we want to do an extra day. But it's a deposit. It's summed up validating. You're having the same challenges that we're having internally as well. And so, I think you do have to try some things. You have to be willing to say it may not work, or it may, or we continually evolve. So it's continuous improvement, just like science is. And we always leave a little budget for that idea that might be a good one, and you build on it. We went into the pandemic and said, okay, let's try a different approach to this, and things change, and we'll continue to do so. But I agree with you. I think it's the fun, that's the authenticity that's key to reaching audiences in general. Well, Thomas and Kristin, thank you so much for your time. It's been a great researcher.